You're on the party line with Sara and Christy. This is I'm on the Phone podcast, where we're healing out loud, sharing culty stories, and laughing at the mess along the way. So grab a coffee, a bestie, settle in, and let's talk. Hello, everyone. It is just me today. Christy has been unable to record for the last couple of weeks, so we're just going to go ahead and keep going with my story of leaving the cult. And it's going to be a little weird for me and maybe you too, since she is not here. So we will do the best that we can to finish this up. So jumping right in, we kind of left off where COVID had just hit and I was in school, and as everyone knows, the world felt like it changed pretty much overnight. And along with that came a lot of different things for different people. I actually do remember hearing a lot of people talking about how the forced rest was eye-opening for them in the amount of rest that they didn't realize that they needed. And that for sure was true of us. We were overwhelmed and exhausted, and it was COVID gave us the opportunity to take a step back and rest and really evaluate where we were and how things were going. It made it very interesting to be in massage school, of course, learning a hands-on modality. Learning how to do that when you have a 6-foot rule around everyone. Keep your distance, and we're all in this together. So we moved to online classes only, doing only the lecture portion of our studies for that time. And, all the kids moved over to homeschooling at the same time, which fortunately for us, the curriculum that they used already had a homeschool option available. And so they were able to immediately just open that up for all the rest of the kids who weren't already there. So relatively speaking, it was a pretty easy transition for the teachers to not have to, all of a sudden create new lessons. But, it's still different going from traditional classroom to being homeschooled virtually overnight for everyone. And I will say, even for my professors, there were some who excelled at teaching online and some who did not. And that's through no fault of their own. Obviously, no one planned to be doing that. It just, it was a circumstance that we couldn't avoid. So along with that, it was just really surprising the amount of, even though it was scary, at the same time, there were so many things that were just an absolute relief, like not being under constant scrutiny anymore, because everyone was gone. There was no one to constantly be looking down their nose or around the corner at what you were doing or not doing or wearing or not wearing. And, just that constant level of living the fishbowl life, as we like to call it, it was a lot. And to have a break from that was just, like I said, just so eye-opening to what we were experiencing and had become so accustomed to that we didn't see really how badly it was affecting us. So that was quite a revelation. It really just gave us space to breathe and, be with our family more. That's probably during their entire time there, that was the most that we saw of our entire family together. That included my husband, of any of that time there. So, once everything stopped, we all just kind of realized how much we had actually been holding our breath. And I can just thinking about that makes me want to take a really big breath. also during that time, it felt sort of like a financial windfall with the checks from the government coming, which we easily qualified for. So in a way, we felt very wealthy, even though we were not. And those checks were not what people would be used to living on. However, for us, it was like all of a sudden a whole new world opened up, and we were able to get things that we had put off, that we had needed for quite some time. And then pay off some bills that we needed to pay. And it was just such a good thing for us. It was it was interesting to hear other people's experiences. I know that so many people's experiences throughout that time was awful, and I truly feel sorry for them. I wish that they did not have to experience that. But for us, it was a time of rest and relief and the ability to like just reflect on how life at that place was impacting us. But of course, we know that life did start to gradually start going back to normal. For me, I was eventually able to go back to school and go back to the hands-on learning, which was a lot of fun because who doesn't love being a guinea pig for massage school? Anyways, we had started back to school in person, and we're spending our entire days doing hands-on versus half and half. And it was great, great stress relief if you got a good partner that day. And, a little bit at a time, just starting to feel kind of like yourself again. It was just such a crazy time. But we got through the year, and it ended up being for us a good thing. And I graduated in December, and then in 2021, in February, I started my first job as a licensed massage therapist at a spa, and it ended up being one of my favorite jobs ever. I had the best bosses I've ever had, and life was essentially good. So anyways, while I was working at my new job, one of my new coworkers asked me one day how I felt about, or if I liked psychology, which I do. So of course I was like, absolutely. And so she said she had been listening to one that was really interesting called The Place We Find Ourselves by Adam Young. And so I just popped it into my list of things to listen to for later and kind of forgot about it for a couple weeks. And with my new job came a commute that I'd never had before. And I was driving 40 minutes to work one way, which is kind of a long ways, but it was worth it. And honestly, I feel like that's the time that I needed, because once after a couple weeks, like I said, I saw a title come up on one of the episodes, like the newest episode for that podcast, and it sounded interesting. And so I just, was going to work, saw that pop up, and just hit play. And as I was listening, I was just like going, oh, crap. Oh, crap. This isn't good. Oh, crap. And I was just like, I am going to have to start from the very beginning on this one. So, I think that day on the way home or the next day, I started with episode 1, and I couldn't stop. It was like watching a freight train, and all of a sudden, I'm like sobbing on the way to work, on the way home from work, most days. And I just couldn't stop listening. because all of a sudden my life just started making sense. And it was finally like someone was just like, you're not crazy. Like the things that you have felt and seen that didn't make sense now make sense. And all the puzzle pieces just started fitting together. And I would relate to each episode in one way or another. Obviously, not directly to each story, but in a lot of the dynamics that were present. And in the way that he would explain, like how psychology works and how attachment theory works. And all these different things were just starting to click and make sense. And I was, it allowed me to start seeing the patterns in my own life of where things had kind of gone off the rails and the patterns in other people's behaviors that all of a sudden I could never put a finger on, but I knew it was wrong or felt off. And I was starting to see the patterns in where we were in the CHM and how those patterns of behavior were very similar to the other ones I was seeing. It's like it was the macro version of what I was used to living, which makes sense because, living in the CHM and living in the cult, the religion is your identity. The cult is your identity. And that doesn't mean just when you're at church on Sunday. It's every day, all day, 24/7, 365. And so I just began to put all the pieces together of why I was struggling so much. And so I was really starting to gain a lot of knowledge and perspective. And it was really bringing to surface the cognitive dissonance I've been living in and the impact that has. And also me just realizing more and more and more that I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. And I can't just be quiet anymore and just shut up and take it and always be fawning and trying to make everyone else, happy. And always, making myself smaller. That is not naturally who I am. I got so used to being what I thought people wanted me to be in order to make them happy, and being so afraid of the fallout if I didn't do those things. And I knew in my mind what those consequences would be if I spoke up about my truth and my reality. And it turns out I was right. Obviously, it was already happening in the cult, in where we were living, and how I was being reported on just for doing things that are absolutely normal and not sinful. But in their mind, wearing short sleeves and sandals and makeup will send you to hell, and you are deserving of eternal conscious torment for that. I absolutely do not believe that. In fact, I don't actually believe in an eternal conscious torment as a punishment for existing as a human, whether you're saved or not, quote unquote. I don't believe in hell like that. In fact, I don't really believe in hell of that sort at all. And that is not what I was taught growing up. So there was a lot of ways in which my understanding was changing. I was finding resources that finally were explaining why the things that were taught to me as sin or taboo. And it's really hard to exist in a world where, in one church you go to, you can wear short sleeves and everyone's fine with that. But you don't know who's going to be upset by how, like, what's too short. Like, there's no official line. So all of this is coming to the surface, and I'm just recognizing these patterns in my life and in my own family in my own upbringing and the churches I had been to, and just looking at all the experiences I'd had and coming to realize that some of the experiences I had, I didn't have the proper words for before, like non-consensual sex. It wasn't something I asked for. It was put upon me, and I did not understand why I would dissociate from my body when I would think about that, or why I had the memories I did have around that. I had never learned to call it rape, because in my mind, rape was only violent. There was a lot of things around that to this day I'm still working out, that I still don't have words for it, that I don't know how to think about it. It was such a horrible experience, and not something that I was expecting that day, at all. So, and there's even parts of that story I have shared it more in depth on Hillbilly Broadcast. But there are even things about what I've shared. I have not shared the entire story, and I don't know that I will. But a lot of the reason why it sat with me the way that it did was because I didn't understand consent. I did not have a good sex education, and it hurt me physically and emotionally, and psychologically in so many ways. And for years, I thought it was my fault. And it just, it absolutely was not. There's just no way. So all of these things are coming to the surface. My experiences at the school down south were also very sexually charged. And I was spoken to so inappropriately and talked about so inappropriately without having done anything, to my knowledge, to deserve those things. So I was processing a lot. And then one of the episodes came up, and Patria Rector was the guest, and I felt like she was telling my story. It was so strange. And as I was listening, she was talking about the Broken and Beautiful, which is a counseling center that she has put together to do story work, like on the podcast. They were trained all at the Allender Center. So I went and looked it up and contacted them for an interview, and I actually spoke to Patria, and they placed me with a counselor. And that was my first ever experience seeing a counselor or a therapist or anything like that. And so I began the work, and it was utterly life-changing. The podcast itself had already changed my life. Like, the concepts I was grasping and the puzzle pieces that were just coming together were just utterly life-changing. And I began doing that work and starting the very long process of untangling everything that I've been taught about religion, life, and myself. And I will forever love my counselor for all the work that she did with me. It was just incredible. And I feel like I got so lucky that the first one that I came upon and worked with was such a perfect fit for me. So of course, doing all this work was really bringing up a lot of things around my own family, which is inevitable, because my family was already part of the cult. I was born into the cult. And so, of course, the teachings and way of life and culture was just part of my everyday family life. And, growing up, I would never have, even up to that point, I would never have said, oh, I had a horrible childhood. I had lots of great memories of my childhood. I still do. There's so many things that I wouldn't change about it. But there's so many things at its core that I absolutely would. And I never had words to put to that, except that I already knew as a young married woman that most of what I was striving to be, wanting to be a better person, I felt like most of what I was looking for and had to go on was a lot of what not to do. Of course, I was never really able to express that to anybody. It was just always there in my mind, like, this is what I experienced, and I don't think that's okay, and I don't think it's healthy, and I don't want my children to experience what I did. And so that was the plan, just to not do that. And that is actually really, really hard to have a blueprint of what not to do, while at the same time trying to create a whole new blueprint yourself of what to do without any help from someone who's already been there, or who has a better idea, or who actually understands and knows better, like professionals. So that has always been really hard, but I had some key things that were really at the top of the list that I was like, these absolutely are non-negotiable. And one was apologizing. I would always, I'd promised myself I would always apologize when I was wrong, when I'd hurt my kids. And I feel like so far that I have kept that promise, and I intend to keep it. Well, like I said, all these things, listening to the podcast, doing the work with my counselor, was really bringing up a lot of things. And see, I'm trying to think. I was with her almost to the end. During that time, I had no intention of telling any of my extended family that I was in therapy or counseling, and I didn't tell them. One day I was waiting on my son to be done with youth group, and I was sitting in the parking lot waiting, and was working on my homework, reading a book specifically for me that my counselor had recommended. And my mom got in the car and saw what I was reading. And, the way it came across to me, she sounded very mocking, because she was like, "Did I abuse you?" It was just very, I don't know, condescending or mocking, the way the tone was. Because you could tell by the title that that's what the book was about. And I don't know why anyone would say that like that, except, maybe some discomfort. Automatically assuming that she already knew the truth. That was probably uncomfortable. I don't know. Either way, I was discovered to be having therapy, and it was not what I wanted at the time, but it happened without my consent. So that interaction was misconstrued deeply, and I was mocked and not taken seriously. And I had already been operating for as long as I can remember of being very careful about the information that I shared about my true thoughts and feelings, because they were absolutely not safe and would have consequences that I was not prepared to deal with. I couldn't handle confrontation and anger of that level. Like I just couldn't do it. I had been trained not to be able to do that. Speaking up and having a different idea or perspective was just simply not allowed. So I kept quiet. I did not, and I still know that that was the right thing to do. It was not safe to talk to my mom or anyone about what was going on because I was still figuring out how to even articulate it. I couldn't even articulate everything at that point yet, and I was just still processing and just figuring things out. So me not talking got misinterpreted and narratives filled in the blanks, just completely made up because I hadn't said anything, and things got really out of hand in the spinning that narrative of whatever non-existent story was there, and things that I was posting, which I to this day do not understand. There's a whole thing with my Facebook that is just off the rails. I looked over that entire year worth of posting that I was being, accused of slandering people, I guess. And I couldn't find anything that they were talking about that people were supposedly asking them about. And I'm still very confused about this one. It just doesn't make sense to me at all. I posted a lot from like Sheila Gregoire at Bare Marriage because that was my life experience, like in purity culture and, the things that I learned at Bible college, and even more so after Bible college when I was a young married woman. Our church did the love and respect videos multiple times that we were part of, and they were super harmful, still are. There's things about those books that still to this day I am trying to get out of my head because they're so harmful and they affect how I behave. And I'm still very confused about the whole Facebook debacle that apparently I was supposedly doing things and saying things that I am unaware of to this day. It was never pointed out to me what I actually said or posted, so that's also a little suspicious to me. And I think people must have been taking something out of context. And if that's the conclusion they came to, I don't really know what to say about that, except that maybe that's already in your head. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. Anyways, as time kept passing, I kept withdrawing more and more, and I did not feel safe. And every time I would be around my family, I felt like everything was a complete act. I was not able to be my authentic self anywhere except inside the four walls of my own home. And even that was like kind of limited because of being on the campus still. So I really kind of felt like a prisoner in my own home. And there was just so much on my mind that I was dealing with, just being there. And then in the last week of September into the first week of October of 21, my second oldest son, who was 10 at the time, after some very traumatic events, was diagnosed with functional neurological disorder or conversion disorder. The updated term is the functional neurological disorder. And that literally changed our lives overnight. I ended up having to quit my job in order to take care of him. And that process of getting him to a place where he could function at all was extremely intense and traumatic. And it was like a layer that overtook everything else that was going on at the time. It was really difficult for my other kids because I had to spend so much time or so much focus on him. And, they're young, they're pretty young at that time too. So it was extremely difficult. And I remember being asked that I would bring my kids to a family Christmas by my mom to show them off. In spite of the fact that he would pass out and most likely have a seizure. And I was just thoroughly appalled that that was something that she was okay with because it made her look good. Also, Thanksgiving of that year was really a pivotal point in time. It was only a couple months after his diagnosis. We spent it at my brother's, and everything was just, going along. Everyone was getting along, we can always get along on the surface. And the meal was almost over. People were starting to get up. And all of a sudden, my mom starts talking and her tone shifts, the volume goes up just enough for it to be noticeable, but not questioned. And she brought up Christy, which Christy had been my lifeline that year. That was the year they came to the campus. And at this point, she was my literal lifeline to sanity. And we had become very close. And I spent a lot of time at the coffee shop with her, crafting, chatting, drinking tons of coffee, of course. And just having like what felt like for the first time, like a friend who felt like my sister. And just being able to relate on so many levels with different things, especially in our craftiness and our ADHD. We just shared so much in common. And she and her family had visited my parents' church, which we were no longer attending. Because with my son's diagnosis, there was major social anxieties that came with that, as well as extreme like noise sensitivities. And so it had allowed us to gradually ease ourselves out of attending that church. So they were just visiting, and my mom saw her and cornered her into a conversation. And honestly, it's like one of those things that in your mind you feel like is probably true, but you just hope with everything in you that it's not. She proceeded to tear down me, my family, my kids, and to Christy and in front of her girls, and talked about how I was an awful person, that we shouldn't have had as many kids as we had, that we didn't know how to parent, all kinds of things. And not one good thing was said about me. And she said that, here, I actually have the letter in front of me that Christy actually wrote so that she wouldn't forget and I wouldn't forget. she was defending herself from imaginary accusations against her from me, none of which I had ever actually made. So I'm not sure where those accusations came from in her mind. If they were taken from some misunderstanding off of Facebook, or the one interaction we had in my car when she found out that I was in therapy. And the only thing I actually said or asked her in there was why she was always angry. And that was the extent of it. But Christy wrote this down and said that she was defending herself against accusations from me. And she tried to speak to her when given the chance, but it didn't sound like there was much chance. She did take up for me and tried to assure her that we weren't really talking about her that much. We did talk about her some, but trust me, it was hardly the main topic of conversation. We had plenty else to talk about. She told her how much of an encouragement and help I had been to her, but she kept on going and had nothing positive to say about me. She said that I blamed her for everything wrong that happened in her life, and I wasn't a fit mother, and my husband and I shouldn't have had that many children, and they didn't know how to parent, and on and on and on. And none of that time was there any sort of, I'm just reading through this, but there was no self-reflection or any possibility that, she could own any part of this problem. And she was just very opinionated and very much playing the victim of my alleged accusations, which I'm still trying to figure out what they actually were. And so the whole time that she's standing there, Christy is actually starting to feel sick and have a panic attack because of the way my mom is talking to her. And when my mom saw me at the dinner, like a few days later, I think, and she's like, "Oh, I saw Christy and her girls," and I'm like, "Oh, that's nice. Okay." That's all I could really say about that. I'm like, unless you want to tell me something about it, I don't like, what do you want me to say about it? That sure. And I didn't, but I knew the way she had brought it up, something was up, but I didn't know what. And so I just responded as best as I could, like I normally would, like, okay, you saw my friend, you said hi. Didn't sound like there was much more than that at the time. And that was that. And I just like, that was the strangest interaction I'd had with her in a while. And I was like, something is just off. Well, a few weeks later, back up just 1 second. The next day, Christy went in for gallbladder surgery. And so she was not able to like talk to me for some time after that happened. And also she was like a little trepidatious about telling me about that conversation because it was so awful. But when she did finally tell me, all of a sudden everything clicked into place, like why my mom was acting the way she was about when she had seen Christy at the church and why everything seemed so off. And I was like, okay. I'm assuming she was looking for some sort of reaction from me. I didn't give her one because I didn't have one. Honestly, if I had known that she had said that at that time, I don't know if we would have been at the dinner. And I do vaguely remember someone being like, we weren't sure if you'd show up. And I'm just like, why would you think that? Anyways, there's so many weird little details about that whole incident. And it was just odd. But it was like the final nail in the coffin of me knowing that that we would not be able to continue to be in a relationship with them for a whole lot longer. It was in fact 6 more months. things just kept happening. And so we just kept stepping back away and away and away. And with all the other things going on, it was just something that I could not deal with on top of everything else. We had committed to leaving the school, and we were on the job hunt now for my husband to have a new career. And one of the jobs that he was looking for had a long hiring process that he was in the middle of that, we never knew. I mean, there was long waits. It was like, hurry up and wait constantly. And then there would be another part of that process that you would have to go to. And so it would be like weeks of waiting in between times and us not knowing what's going to happen. And if that doesn't work out, then what? Well, he got down to the very last interview of that job, and another guy got the job. And that was the first week of March, I believe, of 23. And of course, at this point, we're just devastated. And we only have a few months left before we have to leave. And everything just feels like it's absolutely crushing in and down on us. And I'm being asked again for more information from my mom, especially about what's going on. And I don't know what's going on. I have no information to give. And it's extremely stressful to deal with that and not know what's coming, along with dealing with a special needs child now, along with dealing with living on a campus that is just, scrutinizing your every freaking move. And it's just mind-boggling. And the whole time you feel like everything you're doing is you're faking it. You smile just to get by, just so people don't ask you questions, so that you don't have to answer questions. Even about my son, like, I don't want to go anywhere because I didn't want to have to talk about my son. I don't want to answer these questions because, again, even with this diagnosis, there's no real answers as to when things would change or anything like that, because there's no known cure. And it was like, it's a rare condition. So I really would just isolate, just so that I didn't have to see people and answer their questions. And I didn't post about it on Facebook because I didn't want to answer their questions. And, time is just ticking. And I just feel like we're just in this pressure cooker that's about to blow. And I am just at my wit's end, acting like everything is fine when it's absolutely 1,000% not fine. And things keep happening on every level with the campus and the school, and then with my son, and then with my family. Things just kept happening that were inappropriate from the school and from my family. And they were just hard, keeping up with all these appointments for my son too, in the midst of all this. Trying to go back to work because I really needed a paycheck. We never saw my husband because he was always working. And I do mean always. And again, I just cannot express to you enough how much of a pressure cooker that I felt like we were in. My husband would come home looking like he was just shell-shocked, and honestly, he probably was. We decided to go ahead and keep pursuing the career that my husband actually wanted to pursue. He had applied at another location. Again, these processes take a little time. He got through, I think, to the end, and then another person asked him to apply somewhere else, and was able to kind of streamline that for us so that we could get in more quickly, because we needed to be able to find a home and purchase a home and move and leave in a very short amount of time. And so we said yes to that and started that process. My first experience ever buying a home, actually, we'd never bought a home. And so I'm working with the mortgage guy and getting all of the documentation that he needs, and trying to prove how much money you're going to make at a job you don't yet actually have is something else. And we're just living from day to day, not really knowing what's coming next. We don't have a home lined up. We don't officially have a job, and everything's just in limbo. And I get a text one day from my mom saying that they're trying to give us space, but us not telling them anything is maddening as my parents. And it was for me, that was just it. That was the moment that I just couldn't pretend anymore. I just, at some point, I had to start being honest. And it took me 2 hours to respond to that text with an honest reply. And I said, that I couldn't pretend like things were okay anymore when they weren't. And that's why I hadn't been around. After which she proceeded to rip me apart in 2 more texts, act like she was apologizing when they were anything but an apology, and accused me of everything being my fault, and accused my kids of being at fault and calling them liars, and basically that my kids were being manipulative, and that they had told them things about me and they had just kept their mouth shut, which doesn't make sense to me. And the thing of it is, I knew that my parenting was awful. And that was literally why I started therapy and why I started seeking help, because I saw how all this stuff was impacting me and impacting how I was parenting my kids. And it was bad. It was really bad. And I couldn't live with that. That was my whole goal as a parent, was to not do that to my kids. And that's what I was doing. But I didn't know another way. And I had to find another way. And that's why I did what I did. That's why I sought help, because I couldn't do it by myself. So I was literally shaking from head to toe. And I kept watching the clip from Captain Marvel where she's breaking free from the mind control. I would just watch it over and over and over and over again. And I sent, it might have been 3 or 4 sentences long, but I just said that's, we hadn't been around because I couldn't pretend anymore. And I wasn't going to put my family in a position where they were going to continue to be hurt. And I hit send. And yeah, the response that I received was absolutely asinine and very predictable. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. And so this, this breach is happening, in my own family life. We're getting ready to leave the cult. My son has serious medical issues, and all of our finances are entirely depleted, and everything has depended on us living there. And my in-laws graciously helped us out. We would not have been able to leave without their help. And I will forever be grateful for that. there's a lot of details that I'm leaving out on purpose because I do not want to share all of those details. Those are private and they're mine and they're my children's. But I continue to hear stories to this day of things that happened that are just wrong. The response from her was denial, deflection, more concern about the image. And the biggest realization that I had that there was no room for truth. There was no room for self-reflection, like true self-reflection. And I just knew like this, I can't respond to this. There's no ears to hear. So I just let it go and I didn't respond. A couple weeks later or so, my grandma texted me, which was interesting in and of itself. She texted me that she was visiting my mom and would like to see me. And normally, I would already have known that because we would already have made plans to get together. So I made arrangements to pick her up and have her come stay with me for a day, maybe two. And I was so nervous driving to my mom's house to pick her up because I did not know what to expect. I didn't know if there was going to be a blow up, if anything would be said to me at all. I had not responded to her last texts. And I did not know what to expect. So I arrived and let her know I was there. My mom brought her out to the car with a little suitcase, got her suitcase into my car, all while not looking at me once, not saying anything to me at all, and completely avoiding any communication with me. So took my grandma back to my house and let her spend some time with my kids, telling old stories from when she was a kid that, they're hilarious. Like, the stories that you like to hear, like from back in the day. And she regaled them with her tales. And eventually, they were ready to move on and do something else. And so I just let her talk more, and just let her tell me the stories she wanted to tell me. And it was interesting because that day she told me stories that I hadn't heard before, and about some family dynamics that I hadn't heard before. And it just became very, very crystal clear that this behavior was generational. And the longer the day went, the more I just knew. I was like, I can't have her stay the night because it was so triggering to listen to her stories and just realize how deeply these behaviors went. So I took her back home to my mom's house that evening, and my dad was out working in the garage. My mom was outside with her dog, and I could tell they were a little surprised that I was pulling in, but I pulled in, and my mom saw me and immediately walked around to the back of the house, out of sight, like complete as far away as she could get. And I put my grandma's luggage just inside the door, in the house, and talked to my dad for about 20 minutes, gave him all the updates that I possibly could give him that, I didn't know more. I was still in the waiting period of what was going on. And I just, we just didn't know what was happening next. We did not have answers for our own selves, but I gave him the updates that I had, and we talked for maybe 15, 20 minutes. He never brought anything up about my mom, and he acted like what was happening in front of us wasn't happening. She came around the corner, saw us still talking, and immediately went back around to the back of the house and in the back door. And I could hear her come in and out of that door, and she just went inside and shut the door. And I finished the conversation with my dad, and I went home. And that was the last time I saw them. And I have not heard from my parents, except for one Merry Christmas from my dad, the first Christmas since then. And it's been right at 3 years. We're coming up on that anniversary this month. So I know I'm talking a lot about my parents today, and I have been hesitant to share my story about this for some time. I wish that that wasn't my story. I wish it could be different. And so that is part of my story. And that's what happened about a month before we moved. We took the job that was offered that had kind of a faster track to get things moving because we desperately needed it, and found a home. And then the people from the church that we were attending at the time helped us move all of our things to a storage unit because the school would not give us an extra 2 weeks to sign our paperwork and move straight from there to our new home. So we had to move twice. And the kids and the dog and I went to Ohio and spent some time at our in-laws, my mother-in-law's, her parents' home. And it was amazing. It was the little vacation and retreat that we needed. My husband had to start work, and so he was staying with a family nearby. And then 2 weeks later, we packed up again to come back from Ohio. And on the road, I was doing the last minute financial things and getting things done and signed before we could go sign the papers at the realtor's office and officially own our home for the very first time ever. It was crazy. And that was just moving and getting out of there. And then the last 3 years have been intense. I'm not going to lie. It has not been easy. But it's also been the most freeing. And I am so grateful to be here now. I spent, especially probably the first year and a half or so, looking around at area churches and reading every website, trying to figure out what to do and where to go. And then, just as my understanding broadened and deepened, church has just not been something that's on the table for us. Christy and I have talked about this on the podcast, I think at different times. But we no longer call ourselves Christians. I don't call myself a Christian. I don't want to be associated with the Christians that are very visible these days. I do not believe in the God of the Bible. I don't believe in the Bible itself. It may have some historically accurate things in there, but as a whole, I don't believe in it as something we should base our entire lives on, our government on. Things have changed a lot, and I'm glad for that. And that part of it may be a different episode, but leaving the cult physically was quite the experience. and I am so glad to be gone. We'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Bye. You've been listening on the Party Line to I'm on the Phone podcast with Sara and Christy. Join us again next week for more stories about our pre, post, and mid-culture life. Thanks for listening.